Hello, I'm Michael Wade of Appalachian State's History Department. Welcome to the Academics. There's been a lot of news this week, and this is your opportunity to listen in as we talk about it. Our academics are Dr. Nancy Love of Appalachian's Department of Government and Justice Studies and Dr. Paul Gates of our Department of Communications. Now let's get to it. Our first topic is race in America and continuing problems such as the various cops versus minorities confrontations and the tragic shooting in Charleston, South Carolina at the Emmanuel AME Church this week. Shouldn't we have progressed beyond this by now in supposedly post-racial America? And what does all of this have to do with Rachel Dolezal and racial identity out in Washington State? Is race a matter of genetics or the mind? Nancy?
Well, I need to start by saying I find it hard even to speak about the murders of 9 members of the Emmanuel AME Church in Charleston, allegedly by Dylan Roth. They were at a Bible study meeting, and they welcomed him to their church and their group. So I acknowledge the tragedy and the horror of this crime. That said, some things that we need to think about. South Carolina does not have hate crime laws. This was a hate crime. And I think we could also call it an instance of domestic terrorism. Roth was very clear that he was there to shoot black people, and his language mirrored white supremacist groups who fear that blacks are taking over our country. The second thing I think we need to consider is that these are not isolated incidents, that Roof is not a lone wolf. There's been an unprecedented rise in membership in hate groups, much of it fueled by the internet and hate websites since 2001. Some decreased the last few years, but some of that is because of the mainstreaming of some of the issues that these groups have targeted, specifically immigration, and because of some improvements in the economy. And then the third thing that I want to say is that we don't yet know whether the target was this historic black church, its specific members who were in the Bible study group, which included the pastor, Pinckney, who was one of the state legislators who sponsored a bill for police to wear body cameras, or both. And so we need to understand that there's a much longer history here of issues that this country has yet to address in terms of race and racism and the legacy of white supremacy, which is my segue to whatever Rachel Dolezal is doing. And she has certainly prompted a national conversation about those issues. The problem that I have is when a white woman, assuming that she is biologically white, becomes the poster child for discussions of those issues, African American women and men are once again displaced from the center of the dialogue. And so however we wind up discussing this issue of the social construction of race or race as a biological category, and I lean much more toward the former, we have to recognize that this may not be the person to lead that debate. The National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, the Spokane chapter of which she was the president, she's now stepped down, has expressed concern about her deceit and also about this as a distraction from the real issues, which are the racial equality of all people, but right now, especially black people in this country. So I'm curious what other people are thinking about Caitlin and Rachel, transgender and transracial, and how both of them in very, very public ways are playing with those categories.
Paul, I don't mean to put you on the spot, but I want to tell our audience that in addition to being a professor of communications with a PhD, Paul Gates is also a lawyer, and he may have some perspectives from that angle as well.
The legal issues, I don't think, are really clear with the Rachel deceit or Caitlyn Jenner. I don't think there's anything there. I think the legal issues are fairly clear cut in the shooting. I think the evidence is, we have surveillance cameras now, and of course, the fact that we are protected by surveillance cameras also gives rise to the fact that we have video of everything today. So I'm kind of getting off the legal issue there. I don't think there's going to be difficulty in bringing the case to trial. But I'm mostly curious about the technology involved in all the racial things we've been talking about. The police shooting in North Charleston, now of course the surveillance camera in Charleston, the church shooting. One, of course, it's a citizen cell phone camera in the North Charleston case. It's the church's own security system in the North Charleston case. But in both cases, in either one, we have the kind of capability of seeing what's going on that we haven't had before. And I think people are not used to that yet. And I'm a little bit surprised by that. A little bit surprised that the police officer in North Charleston didn't entertain the possibility that somebody was maybe not just watching, but recording. And it doesn't seem to be that new technology to me that people shouldn't be aware of it.
I have a question for you. I think we're all, probably most people are pretty upset by this shooting, even those of us who were near it. Cameras, it's on tape, so to speak. Does this have any implications for speedy justice in this case?
Well, it's good evidence. It's the best evidence that you can get. I think it's even more reliable than eyewitness evidence, which is notoriously unreliable. But cameras don't lie. Cameras record everything. There's no interpretation needed. Really, there might be some discussion about exactly what was the item that the police officer apparently dropped next to Scott after he shot him, but that can be teased out of the film pretty easily. It's just a technical problem. But I think it makes certainly the prosecution far easier than if that were not the case. Same thing with the church shooting. There you have film of his entrance to the church and his departure from the church, and you'll have to use that again with other testimony and other evidence that will be gathered, but it'll be able to create a good timeline, which will be very important in the prosecution of that case.
Nancy?
Oh, I was just to say, I think you've raised a larger issue here, which is visibility of identities. And are people perhaps less comfortable with transracial than transgender because race is visible in a way that gender may not be? And how is that playing into this whole debate?
There's I was struck by an article. Adolph Reed, a political science professor at the University of Pennsylvania, did a pretty good measured defense of Rachel Dolezal and her right to identify, to self-identify, even with what he said were her misunderstandings about what constitutes blackness. He, I thought, did quite a job of demolishing the racial identitarians' assumption that, as he put it, race is a thing, an essence that lives within us. And that identitarian essentialist argument is the starting point for most of the assaults on Ms. Dolezal. And ironically, that's an argument that white racists have readily embraced from the days of lynch mobs right down to the present, that there's something unique and inferior about people of other races. I'm just wondering what you think of that.
Well,
is she within her rights?
I look at, particularly when you hold the Rachel Dolezal and Caitlyn Jenner situations together, that question of identity, what comes to me first is, why were they doing it? What was the purpose? Now, I don't think Caitlyn Jenner there wasn't anything that she was trying to accomplish. Certainly, in her previous life as Bruce Jenner, famous athlete from Olympics 40 years ago, and everybody remembers that. It's kind of a little sideshow that he managed to, at some point, get connected with the most exhibitionist family in America. And
the Kardashians.
And the Kardashians, exactly. And but even that, there was nothing that Caitlyn Jenner needed to accomplish by coming out and taking this step as a transgender person. Rachel, on the other hand, it seems to me that there may be a question of her trying to benefit in some way. Now, what that might be, I don't know. But that, however she arrived at that point, that she felt she needed to make whatever point she might be trying to make. Whereas Caitlyn Jenner, that's the way Caitlyn Jenner is. Mm-hmm. Just expressing herself in this new transgender role as a natural progression of that person. When somebody takes in Rachel's case, when somebody takes on this other identity in a very highly charged kind of venue, I think that raises some questions about what is the benefit to her, and is that a benefit to others in the organization, or is it, mm-hmm. or does it not function that way?
We're going to move along here in just a second, but my dominant impression about all of this finally is that Ms. Dolezal, like Caitlyn Jenner, has been swallowed up now in this vast corporate media machine, which produces pseudo-events for mass consumption, in the process making commodities out of human beings who are struggling with serious personal issues. And with due respect for the importance of race, gender, and identity, Dolezal and Jenner, in my mind, each ought to be accorded the benefit of the doubt. And to some extent, their right to privacy and to protection from public voyeurism. Frankly, the media, I believe, would do us more of a service if it concentrated on topics of genuine relevance to our lives. And I understand this is a function of capitalism, of profit, and advertisers. But the Pope's encyclical on climate change came out yesterday. And there wasn't much on it. Or they might concentrate on our next topic. The meaning of Bernie Sanders' seemingly quixotic campaign for the presidency, and I say seemingly because he's drawing crowds. What important, indeed vital insights does that provide us about the nature of our politics and what we expect of a president, since he's offering an alternative? And beyond expectations, is it possible for a president intent on change to accomplish much in today's Washington?
If we had President Sanders with the current Congress, then I think the answer would be not much is going to happen. I would like to think, though, that if there were a possibility of electing a President Sanders, and I think that's realistic, I would also feel that that would be accompanied by a change in other offices, people voting for senators, representatives at the same time. If they're motivated to vote for Sanders for president, maybe they have realized that by expressing the need for a change that way at the top of the ticket, that they could do the same thing further down. And therefore, we'd end up with another Congress that Bernie Sanders could actually work with.
I don't mean to pin you because I actually agree with you, and I was thinking about it earlier. That said, and I think one of perhaps the greatest failing of the Obama presidency is his failure to use the bully pulpit that was afforded him.
Yes.
But Bernie Sanders is, albeit an independent, a member of the United States Senate. Would he not have to campaign to some extent for a new Congress in order to get it? And how would that play with the voters? I think we know how it would play with his colleagues.
Right. He would have to paint the campaign in such a way that it's not just about him. He would have to be talking to the country about everything that is contributed to the stalemate we find ourselves in, and he would have to just address every question and show how that would how changes throughout Congress would help move his agenda along, which people would at that point have subscribed to, and he would have to say, well, this is what we need to do to accomplish the things I've been talking about. You need to elect a Congress that will work with these ideas.
I think, though, he needs more than a Congress. He needs a sustained grassroots activist movement. A recent article by Joe Pescick and William Grover suggested that it was going to be harder for Sanders to govern if he was elected than it would be for him to win the office of the presidency, because he would be imprisoned by assumptions as usual about economic growth and national security. And so until a grassroots activist movement arises that can be sustained, and Obama had the movement, but it wasn't sustained, I don't see what Sanders will be able to do even with a change in the party dynamics in Congress.
Well, that's true. The grassroots are easier to bring along than the next task that you talk about, Nancy, which is to fight the political industrial complex.
Exactly.
Which ties everybody's hands. Unless there is some way to accomplish that grassroots effort, though, to really make that effective. If you can't do that, though, you're not going to get to any other problems. So the grassroots, absolutely, that's where it starts. Yes.
Consider this rhetorical as we move to our next topic. I wonder if the Obama, if the failure to sustain that grassroots movement wasn't, I think it might have died for lack of nourishment from the White House. Another public issue, and one that whoever is elected president may well have to deal with, is water. And it's come up because of the extended drought over much of the country, and it surfaced most interestingly recently in California with the, figuratively speaking, California water wars. A harbinger of larger water-related issues which should be probably addressed now rather than later. Water is an absolutely indispensable human necessity. Should access to it be determined first and foremost by money? Should it be controlled by large moneyed interests looking for a profit? There are people in California and elsewhere who think so. What do you think?
If we were talking about another kind of natural resource, if it weren't water, I think, okay, if you can afford it, you buy it.
Here?
Well, okay, you're right, Nancy. All right, I stepped into that. I kind of took air as a given, that we don't have to, although we want clean air.
That's one of our problems.
Clean air is the problem. And that's a different kind of issue to have to wrestle with. But with water in particular, since it is so vital, I conceive of it as a public resource that everyone is equally entitled to, like air, like clean air should be. So no, not controlled by private interests. I mean, this is, I think, appropriately the province of government to make sure that in whatever amount we have it, it is fairly apportioned.
There's a problem, and not with what you just said, but with the California example, and I don't think they're unique at all. Steve Uhas of Rancho Santa Fe, California, says, and I quote, "No, we're not all equal when it comes to water," unquote. Rancho Santa Fe is a congeries of gated communities, country clubs, and upscale ranches where the median income is $189,000 a year. Where one gentleman a couple of months ago paid the Rolling Stones $2 million for a one-night appearance at a local bar. Where consumption of water went up 9% in April after Governor Brown asked for a voluntary 25% reduction from all Californians. And they're now being mandated, the top consumers in California, a 36% reduction. It's going to be rationed. And it's prompted outcries about being forced to endure brown lawns and putting greens. In other words, are we looking at class conflict surfacing here, and how should it be resolved?
I think we are. And where both of you have begun is talking about water as essential to life and not something to be bought and sold, and that requires a collective understanding that this is a shared human resource. Our bodies are 65 to 70% water. We can't afford to pollute this resource, and we can't afford, as part of the larger process of climate change, to have sustained droughts. We need to change how we live and respect the earth, which supports our life with water, air, soil, minerals, energy. So I think it's a much deeper problem than the debates about class even can address. That's part of it, but not all of it.
One of the things too, I mean, I'm glad he could pay the money to have the Rolling Stones play and so forth, but I have no sympathy for his lawn. And if it's brown, fine. Water shouldn't be used in that way in times of scarcity. But one of the, I think, a more serious problem than people using water irresponsibly in their households is that what if we don't have enough to sustain agriculture? California is the fruit basket or vegetable basket of the country, Southern California. And you're not just, of course, we're talking about it in terms of sustaining life very directly, as water does, but also feeding us. And we're not just talking about Californians.
No,
we're talking about
no.
Americans when you talk about food.
Talking about the planet.
Yeah, I think this may be something we'll consider on future shows. it seems to me this raises the issue that was really should have appeared in the 2012 campaign. I suspect it'll show up again. Are we a country where we're all more or less in this together, or is everyone on their own in a culture of money?
Yeah.
Any parting thoughts?
I think that's a good topic for another show, Mike. And
Yeah.
I think about, you know, the frontier mentality, you know, that really I think is a myth. You know, Frederick Jackson Turner pointed that out about 125 years ago. That we are in this together. This is not an individual enterprise. There is a collective responsibility, and that is what government is for.
The Founding Fathers envisioned it as a great democratic, small d, Republican, small r, experiment.
One of my colleagues, Brian Smetkowski, says we need to replace rugged individualism with rugged collectivism.
Better find another word. Rugged's fine. Well, that's our program. We'd like to hear from you concerning your thoughts about the academics. Feel free to contact us through our website, www.watchapptv.com. Until next time, I'm Michael Wade.